Okay, well, I think we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Max Lapona. I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Ethics and Society here at St. Anselm College. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you today to our lecture and discussion, Yoga as a Way of Life, Thriving in a Chaotic World. In a moment, I'll introduce our speaker, but for now, I'd like to say a few words about this lecture series. So today's lecture and discussion is actually part of a larger program titled Ethics and Spirituality, a Wisdom Lecture Series. In fact, this is the first lecture in the series, the inaugural lecture, but we have more planned. So we plan to do more next year. In fact, next fall, we have a guest coming from Ireland, a Benedictine oblate who will be speaking about Benedictine spirituality. So we'll send you some more details about that lecture and future events if you're on our list. And I think you'll be on your list if they registered. So look, keep an eye peeled for those. So, but why this lecture series, Ethics and Spirituality? As some of you know, our Center for Ethics and Society has for its mission to do work in organizations and communities in New Hampshire to help them deal with important issues and challenges they're facing, particularly of an ethical nature. So we use research and education, dialogue and collaboration to assist them. We do work in affordable housing with corporate and nonprofit boards. We do work in our high schools, healthcare policy. So there's a wide variety of programs, even artificial intelligence and robotics. So why are we here doing a talk about the yoga tradition or in the fall on Benedictine spirituality? What does that have to do with ethics in society? So I think the reason for this, quite simply, is we realize here at the center that though we do ethics work, for example, with the state legislature, ethics doesn't begin there. And though we do ethics work with corporate boards and organizations, ethics doesn't begin there. When we do work with ethics in schools and ethics doesn't begin there, it really begins with the individual, with individuals grappling with questions about the meaning of life, the purpose of life. And based on our answers to those questions, or in some cases, lack of answers, we make important decisions about how we live and how we treat other people. So we know that if the center really wishes to make an impact on campus or in organizations and in communities throughout the state and region, it must really do so by addressing ethics in a meaningful way. And that means by genuinely providing resources for individuals to answer those fundamental questions that we face and to make meaningful changes in their lives and in their communities. So those questions, who are we, what is the purpose of life, and how should we live, are important questions that I think we're all sort of hungry to find answers to. And it's in trying to find answers to those questions that this lecture series was begun. Because of course, we can find answers to those questions in many places. We can find them in the great ethical traditions. We can find them in trusted family members and friends. We can find them in experts in society telling us answers to those questions. Even pick up a book and find answers to these questions. But what better place to look for answers to life's questions and how we ought to live than the world's great spiritual traditions? And it's those traditions of belief and practice that have given countless individuals answers to the questions of life's meaning, help them to cultivate themselves in mind, body, and spirit, and to deepen their bonds with other human beings in their community. So the purpose of this series is really to invite representatives from these different traditions to share with us some of the insights and experiences that they have gathered on their spiritual journey. It's not intended to be an academic series. We do plenty of academic lectures and programs, which have great value. This is really about individuals coming to share their personal insights and experiences with us so that we can learn from them and make decisions about our own lives accordingly. So whether we understand spirituality as a deepening of our relationship with God, or growing our compassion with one another, or simply as awakening our innermost potential, we can learn from those who are struggling on these spiritual paths along with us. And that's the reason for the Ethics and Spirituality lecture series. And we do hope that the community will find it valuable. I noticed that we have a nice mix here today of faculty and staff and students and community members. So welcome and thank you all for coming. Okay, so let me introduce our speaker and say no more about the program. So our speaker today is Sarah Guglielmi. She's a professional yoga educator and certified yoga therapist who is trained in the yoga tradition of the Himalayan Masters for the past 20 years. A former mechanical engineer, she was drawn to yoga looking for relief from chronic stress and illness. She not only regained her health, but discovered a spiritual dimension of life that was richly rewarding. This led her to 20 years of traditional study and practice with the Himalayan Institute under the guidance of Pandit Rajmani Tiganayat. She spent 10 years in residence at the Himalayan Institute's ashram and retreat center in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, and has been in residence at the Himalayan Institute in Buffalo, New York since 2013. And for the past 15 years, Sarah has taught classes and workshops on yoga practice, yoga philosophy, and Ayurvedic lifestyle. She's been a teacher and trainer for the Himalayan Institute's yoga and Ayurveda professional certification programs, as well as an adjunct professor at Damon University in Buffalo. She works with private clients through her business Yoga Lifestyle Design. And whether she is training yoga teachers, college students, or private clients, she strives to make the healing power of yoga both accessible and transformative so her students can directly experience yoga's life-changing effects. I will also note, on a side note, she's also an old friend, and I'm personally very happy to welcome her to St. Anselm College. So please join me in welcoming Sarah.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here with you all. Can you hear me okay? Great. Thanks for that warm welcome, Max. We've been talking about making this happen, I think, maybe for 5 or 6 years. So I'm really thrilled it's come to fruition, and that you all were inspired and really took the time out of your day to learn about what I'm calling the holism of yoga. And what inspired me to bring this particular topic to you all today is really my 20 years of experience in understanding that yoga not only is a practice that you do on the mat, but yoga is truly a whole way of living and contemplating. And through that, it's really changed how I personally have dealt with fear and uncertainty. We're living in a time where all we're seeing is fear and uncertainty and chaos. And through the tools and the contemplative wisdom of yoga, it's really changed my quality of life and really helps me personally still see so much beauty and value and growth and connection in life, even amidst all the chaos and the darkness. And my hope is, by the end of our short time together, you at least have a little bit better understanding of all the different pieces of yoga practice and some ways that you can either continue or begin engaging, with them if you're going to do that. Max did give a good overview, from my bio of my background. I did start out as an engineer. That's what my educational background is. And I was really suffering in my mid to late 20s with chronic health problems, debilitating anxiety, and really looking for answers. Just really trying to find a way to feel better. I didn't think this was what life was supposed to be like. And I don't think I'm the only one that struggles with that experience. And what you'll see as we go through this discussion is yoga really challenges us to look at the challenges and the problems that we face as teachers, and potentially as opportunities to grow or be moved potentially in directions that maybe we didn't expect. So keep that in mind, as we go through the discussion. So I am coming to you as what would be called a practitioner of yoga or a seeker. That's a couple of the words used in the yoga tradition. Someone who feels a real calling to yoga as a path, someone who's devoted a lot of time and study to really gain some direct experience that is claimed, in the yoga tradition. So I'm not a professor of philosophy. But I'm coming to you with my own experience and hopes that it might inspire or help others. The other piece I wanted to point out is that, I said in my introduction in my write-up for this talk that, there's millions and millions of Americans that practice yoga, which is fantastic. But if even when, if I'm at a party or somebody introduces me as a yoga teacher, primarily what people associate what I do is a system of exercise, a system of exercise that's really incredibly effective at building strength, flexibility, reducing stress. And it does that. And I don't know, how many of you have any of you ever taken the yoga class? I know we have quite a few. Yeah. Have any of you ever meditated? Meditation. Excellent. There's more hands going up with that question these days. So that's great to see. So, but I have a passion to really help people understand yoga is strength, flexibility, and stress management, and it'll change your life. If you're drawn to yoga and it works for you, if you do it regularly, you're going to feel really much better, both physically and mentally. But it is more than that. Yoga is an ancient tradition of spiritual practice, and most Americans just aren't really aware of that piece. They're aware of this one piece, which is really only, we could say maybe 20% of the whole of what yoga is about. And kind of what my path drew me to, more from divine providence than anything else. I wasn't looking to learn spirituality when I found yoga. I was looking to heal. I was desperate to feel better. But what happened, what has turned out to be my life path, is I was connected with an ancient yoga lineage, which I don't know if you're familiar even with the word lineage, which is not a word most Americans are that familiar with. But yoga is an ancient tradition, thousands of years old. And in order to learn it in its holism, you have to be exposed to a teacher and to a tradition that has that holism intact. And that's just what is challenging this day and age with yoga being so available. It's just, one, you just don't know. Most Americans just wouldn't have much awareness that there is even more that you could learn. Because the access to these teachers that really can hold and carry on the tradition, it's just not the easiest thing to find. But there are some traditions in the US that can pass on yoga in this way. And I just was very fortunate that life connected me to the Himalayan tradition very early on in my yoga journey. So I have had the great fortune to study directly with a spiritual teacher who is considered a master in the yoga tradition. And that has allowed me to learn this holism of yoga that I'm attempting to give you a Cliff Notes version of, as we speak today. So I am someone who, I love discussion, I love interaction. If you do have some questions as we move along, please ask. We are pretty short on time, so what I'll do is as questions come up, if it flows well, kind of in the time that we have, I'm going to address them. I may also ask Hannah to jot down if there's a question we might hold off to the end to expound on when we have a little bit more time. So as a backdrop for this chat we're having, I thought it would be helpful for you to just take a minute and think about what gets in the way of your thriving. What are the challenges that you're facing that really sap the joy out of life or become really oppressive. This is part of the human experience. It's just we don't talk about it enough to remember that it is part of the human experience. But in the context of yoga, my goal is by the end of this talk, you have a better idea of how yoga can address this concept of thriving. Experiencing joy, experiencing freedom, experiencing fulfillment in different dimensions of life. But for most of us, we are facing challenges. The challenges can be in our health, the challenges can be in our finances, in our relationships. In college, I felt a ton of pressure to do really well in school. Lots of confusion about what's going to happen in my future. And we're living in a world and an economy and a climate. There's so much uncertainty that all of us are facing. So if you just make a mental note, if you're a note taker, you could jot down a few notes, or just have it in your mind. What is it that really jams you up and gets you stuck? Because we're going to talk about how do we start to unravel that, at least from the vantage point of yoga practice. And I mentioned before, I'll keep coming back to this, yoga's viewpoint is, can we look at challenge? Can we look at our problems potentially as teachers? That when we're facing fear, uncertainty, doubt, anger, frustration, confusion, it's a way that we're getting a signal to redirect our attention in some way, or potentially engage with an inner dimension of life that isn't being satisfied through all the uncertainty in the outer dimension of life. That is one way you can think about what spiritual traditions are offering. You know, I was looking for who authored this quote that I've heard my whole life, or at least for a long time. I couldn't find it good. I don't know if anyone else knows. But I like this quote, and it's a good thing to remind ourselves again and again and again, because most of us, you maybe never consciously thought about it, but if you do think about it, your mood, your outlook on life, your optimism or pessimism at any given moment very much depends on what your mind is focused on. The challenge is, a lot of the time we are not conscious of what our mind is focused on. We have so many, we have so much conditioning, so much moving into our field of awareness at any given time. What happens is we get caught in these kind of these ongoing cycles of either anxiety, despondency, depression, sadness, anger. And, it's not that there's not a lot of things going on in the world to be concerned about. There are a lot of things going on to be concerned about, but the problem comes when your mind is in essence enslaved by it. You don't have an ability to pull your mind out of that spin. And yoga actually can change that. The holism of yoga practice is designed to awaken a capacity, to awaken these capacities that we all have, but we need some training in order to be able to do it. A capacity to actually become more aware of what you're thinking, that is, creating a negative space, and then to pull your mind out of that space and pull yourself more into the present moment. So I mentioned, in my story, I used to have very debilitating anxiety, which was really 24/7. There was always this underlying unsteadiness, agitation, and it really clouded all of my experience. I know this isn't uncommon, but if you've had that experience, I can empathize, because I know what it's like to be living in a mind where that present moment just really is not available. And so this capacity to pull yourself out of that and be present is where we really experience more of that thriving feeling, which means, when you're more present, you can experience the goodness in life. You're more able to see the goodness in life, if that makes sense. When your mind's in a real negative spin, you can't see the goodness that might be available. All you can see is the negativity. And a lot of these themes don't just come from yoga. There's a lot of universal truths, that are expressed through all the world's religious and spiritual traditions. And, one universal truth is that, in this world we live in, there's always these forces of, we could say, the light and the dark, or the positive and the negative. And so I just want to encourage you, no matter how chaotic and dark the world seems, the way this world operates, according to yoga, and I'll explain a little more why, is that the light is always there. There still is the beauty, the connection, the wisdom, the growth. There's an opportunity for that, but to access it, the more the challenge and the chaos increases, the more we need these inner tools to be able to pull our mind back into that space and build this capacity to redirect our mind to whatever is present. We might be able to get out in nature and have an experience of nourishment, or reconnect with a friend or someone we're in relationship with, or, even being together today, it's just being in like-minded company and contemplating big ideas brings great joy to me. That's one of my favorite things to do. So that's where we're going with this discussion. And I'm gonna frame yoga practice and the holism of yoga practice, and what I'm calling today the 4 pillars of yoga practice. I mentioned in the write-up these 8 limbs of yoga, and this is a little bit more condensed way to talk about those 8 limbs. And I will mention the 8 limbs as well, but the 8 limbs are these Sanskrit words that are a little bit harder to understand, and these 4 pillars I think will help. So the first pillar of yoga practice, the way I'm framing it today, is yoga postures with breath awareness. Probably that's what we're most familiar with. The second pillar of yoga practice is mindfulness and meditation. What I have found, and again, this comes from the holism of yoga not getting fully translated to everybody who practices yoga in this country. I find in yoga studios, more people identify Buddhism with meditation, and they identify yoga with posture work. But traditional yoga practice, thousands of years old, is a system of meditation. Meditation is how you reach the heights of spiritual growth. So Buddhism and yoga philosophy have a lot of overlap. They have some similar origins, of course, and there are some differences. But yoga is a meditation path. It's just not as well known in this country. The Buddhist meditation path is better known. The third pillar I'm calling yoga lifestyle, and then the fourth pillar I'm going to call it yoga worldview. How we look at life and the nature of life. Let me just take a moment. Anybody, are there any thoughts, any reflections, any questions? Like keep talking. Yeah.
What did you find out about the four pillars? Sorry, what did you discover what the 4 pillars were years?
How did I discover what the 4 pillars are?
Yes.
Well, what I'm speaking to you from is what is considered one of the seminal texts of yoga practice. And I'm going to talk about the origins of this as well, but the origins of all these thoughts or this wisdom dates back thousands of years. But about 2,200 years ago, there's a text that was condensed the yoga teachings written by a master named Patanjali. It's called the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. So what I'm condensing down in these 4 pillars summarizes what are called the 8 limbs of yoga, of Ashtanga yoga, that was summarized by the Yoga Sutra. I am going to show you the 8 limbs, and I'll show you how the 4 pillars line up to those 8 limbs. So it came into my own mind, but maybe I'm not the only one. Maybe there's someone else that came up with it too. You have a question?
Yeah, maybe you'll talk about this more for the rest of the talk, but what do you think is the best step for someone who wants to get into this practice? Like, where do you go? Because there's so much to learn about, and there's so many different ways that it's something passive you can take, like, in your opinion.
Yes, I'm absolutely going to address that, and I have a handout to give you just some different access points. But typically where I would have someone start is even to work with 1 yoga class a week, if that's doable for you. There's also resources online, to do things at home, and I'll talk about that more. And more what you want to, if you're looking to do yoga in a way that's going to create the psychological and spiritual transformation, what to look for. Because not all ways of practicing yoga get at that in the same way. All ways of practicing yoga have a benefit, but there's certain things you want to put into the practice to get more of the psychological and the spiritual benefit. Yeah. Good question. Thank you. I also wanted to talk about, I guess I'm calling this the anatomy of fear. And this is really a way you can think about what's going on inside of your mind anytime you're feeling fear, anxiety, despondency, sadness, anything that causes stress. I'm focusing on fear today because that's certainly something we can all relate to, but it's not really any different for all the negative emotions. But when we are experiencing fear, what's happening is on some level, our mind is perceiving a threat. A lot of the time you're not conscious of it. A lot of time what you experience is I feel nervous, or I feel unsettled, or suddenly I'm agitated, or I'm really irritable. But there are thoughts and beliefs going on at the same time. But if you don't have any awareness or training, you don't even recognize that there's some thought thing, there's a thought pattern going on that is linking up with these emotions. So part of what you want to understand when you're trying to transform how you work with fear in life and chaos in life is you want to become more aware of your perception. And I'll talk about how yoga helps you do that. So thoughts and beliefs that are coming along with the fear. So for example, I was just having a chat about the political divide, and all of a sudden I could feel my heart racing more. I'm feeling somewhat despondent about, this happens every time I watch the news for more than for even a minute. There's so much violence, divisiveness. We're just living through this time. And so if I can step back, and yoga has given me a capacity to really have a lot more awareness. I have a lot more awareness of what I'm thinking compared to 20 years ago when I was caught in constant anxiety. So I know what I'm thinking are things like, gosh, what's going to happen? The world's coming to an end. What's going to happen for my nieces and nephews? I mean, there's this whole spiral of thoughts. And what you want to recognize, well, the challenge is this. The challenge is we are wired for self-preservation, and that's a good thing. We are wired to be on hyper-vigilant alert to any threat to our survival. The problem is, and what yoga looks at doing, is we need to develop some kind of discernment to figure out, okay, I'm afraid. What am I thinking? And is this something that's an immediate threat to my survival? Or am I projecting something that's going to happen in the future? Which for me in climate change, in this exact moment, I don't believe it's a threat to my life in this moment. I think it could be down the road, or to my loved ones down the road. So it's not that we don't want to take action to change these problems, but what we want to do is not be so enslaved by this fear all the time, because it saps the joy out of life. So, we're trying to become more aware of those perceptions and be able to question our perceptions. Is this something that really might be going on in the future, or am I worried that something from the past is going to repeat itself? And then can I bring myself back into the present? And can I do something to steady myself? Can I do something to figure out, okay, what do I have control of? What action can I take that feels empowered? That feels like I'm in control of my destiny again, and I'm not constantly overwhelmed by all this, chaos around me. Does that make some sense? What I find, so a big part of traditional yoga practice is contemplation. That's the piece that isn't very well known. The piece that's better known is the piece that helps us reduce stress. So when you're having this perception of threat, and again, it could be a threat to your safety, a threat to your loved one's safety. It could be a threat to your security, a threat to your identity will cause this to happen. What else? Threat to your success. In college, there's a lot of anxiety. I had a lot of anxiety of, this is my future I'm dealing with. So what if it doesn't work out? Or what if this, that, the other thing happens? So that's a piece we'll keep coming back to. How do we figure out, become more conscious what we're thinking? And then anytime you perceive a threat, you're going to have the stress response active, which means you start to feel anxious, your heart rate goes up, you might feel clammy in your hands, you have more muscle tension, and you feel the emotions of fear, anger, anxiety, doubt, sadness, frustration. So yoga practice in its wholeness, it actually gets at all three of these pieces of this equation. Yoga practice will help you learn how to calm down your stress response. That happens by doing the postures and the breathing. What's interesting, culturally, we are conditioned to deal with stress by distracting ourselves. I don't know if you ever thought about this, but most people learn how to deal with stress by distracting their mind from the stress, which we do through TV, being on our devices. We could do it through eating, through shopping, through drinking, through socializing. What these breath-oriented practices do instead, they directly calm down your neurological response to stress. So I like to get that piece in, because that's part of why yoga is so effective at transforming stress, is that it changes the neurological response. And it gives you, yoga is about mastery, becoming a master over your internal world. So that mastery starts with having more mastery over what's over your stress state. Now, I've been doing this for 20 years. Does this mean I've never stressed? No, I experience stress every day, multiple times a day. But I do have a way to pull out of it, pull out of it, pull out of it, pull out of it. You know, I have a way to work with it. And that is, again, it completely has changed the quality of my life. I also talked about how yoga is very focused on contemplation and how do we become aware and challenge our perceptions is a big part of what will change your outlook. And the spiritual piece of yoga is working with a practice and these techniques that help you begin to experience your spiritual dimension of self, which we could call, you know, in this culture, we call it a soul, a spirit. Those are the words we use, but we don't necessarily, it depends what traditions you've been exposed to, but this is about having a conversation that there's actually a way of feeling experience of being more connected to that part of yourself. So one of the ways the goal of yoga is expressed is it's the experience of feeling a sense of safety and security that comes from inside, a feeling of eventually fearlessness that actually is something that is generated from the inside, which means you're connecting to and having a direct experience of your spiritual essence. And I'll say more about that, but that's another piece of what the yoga tradition offers. Any thoughts? Any reactions on that? Yeah.
I know you talked a little bit about like the neurological aspects of yoga and like, that sense of self. And I was reading a study about like they did measurements in brain scans of people during meditation and saw like this neurological pathway of this like oneness with the world. And I guess my question is, do you think that you can measure adequately like what is going on via like neurological mechanisms, but do you think there's something beyond biology that explains, you know, how we can feel when we do yoga and meditation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I am not the most up to date on the current scientific capacities in terms of what they're measuring in terms of states of consciousness. I know it exists, and I don't know if Max has any. So I just don't have a direct answer for you. I could do some research and can certainly follow up on that. The little bit of exposure I've had to yoga research, though, again, I'm not really familiar with the exact metrics, but just as you're saying, that they are able to measure a certain neurological state, or I don't know if they're calling it at certain states of consciousness. I don't know how they're scientifically defining it as oneness with the world, or if it's the practitioner that's telling them an experience that I'd have to read the study. But I definitely believe there is measurement available these days that shows the long-term impact of doing these practices neurologically. Yeah. But sorry, I don't have more direct knowledge right now. Yeah. Anybody else? All right, so we're going to talk a little more about these 4 pillars of yoga practice. And the one, again, most people are familiar with is working with yoga postures. And I very intentionally put breath awareness because working with breath, and maybe if you've had any exposure to yoga and or meditation, you maybe have worked with your breath, paying attention to your breath, regulating your breath. And the reason that's such an important piece is that is the bridge to the spiritual dimension, or I'm going to keep calling it a feeling. It's an experience that you start to, it just feels really good. I don't know if you practice yoga, did you ever notice it feels, did you like it? Did it feel good? Now, some of that goodness is coming from a neurological response, but most people, once you practice for a while, and again, I don't know how to, if it can be measured scientifically, but there's a quality of life that expands from doing these practices over time. Because there is a spiritual dimension you're tapping into, but it's not really something, it's not like some extraordinary thing. It's just a really deep feeling of feeling nourished, steady, supported, And it's something that you can access through your own efforts. And so yoga is just offering, it's something deeper than just neurological that's going on. And the way you access it is through the breath. And this is based on thousands of years and many people trying to figure this out, just like we are. And their direct experience being passed on generation to generation. So let me jump ahead here. Just pretend you didn't see that part. Oh, no, I got it. I'm still not the master of the slide animations here. Okay, that'll work better. Okay. So this is a way of understanding the way the yoga teachings explain a human being, that a human being has multiple dimensions. In this culture, we're very familiar with the body and the mind. So nobody really will argue with you. Yeah, I have a body, I have a mind. And you know, even in the last 20 years of my life, awareness around mental health has really changed. So we have awareness of, you know, we have bones, organs, physiology. We're very aware of our physical health. Most of us can, you know, someone asked, what goes on in your mind? What would you say? I have these thoughts, beliefs, I have emotions. You know, that's the inner world of the mind. But in the yoga tradition, and actually not just yoga and other Eastern traditions as well, there is an acknowledgement of another dimension of us, which is the dimension of prana. And I'll come back to breath in a moment. The word prana is not as well known in this culture, but the word chi is a little bit more well known, just because Chinese medicine is a little bit more integrated. But the concept of prana is exactly the same as the concept of chi. And you know, these translations of this concept, you'll hear life force energy, vital energy, and energy is definitely a manifestation of it. So, you know, you've definitely experienced today, I have a lot of energy. Today, I'm depleted of energy. Anybody have days where you have high energy, days where you have low energy? That's a reflection of prana. But prana is also a much deeper concept than that. Prana is actually, the way the yogis describe it, it's the flow of consciousness. It's actually the flow of nature's intelligence. The intelligence of nature that enlivens all things is flowing, you know, through everything you see outside as much as it's flowing through you. And that's this concept of consciousness. That's that's one of the words used in the translation of the concept of all-pervading omniscience, or the concept, we could use the word God. That word does not work for everybody, just depending on your own background with it and your own, and it doesn't need to work for you. But what I'm trying to give you words and ideas that help it resonate. But that is the concept. The traditional yoga teachings are written in the Sanskrit language, and it's called Ishvara in the yoga scriptures. The concept of an all-pervading omniscience intelligence, we could call it universal consciousness, that is operating in our lives and throughout all of nature. And that this all-pervading consciousness is, even without any type of spiritual practice, it's what we experience through our intuition. It's what we experience through our conscience. These are two words that are more familiar and, to American language. So prana is actually the flow of consciousness moving through you. And that is how yoga works with different practices to help you develop what's called pranic sensitivity, that there's actually a feeling, an experience of being more conscious, being more aware, being more connected to this flow of consciousness that's always there. It's what is enlivening you. It's just that you're not trained to put your attention on it. And you don't have the training to have the sensitivity to it. So that's you know, that's a Cliff Note version of how do you start to have an actual spiritual experience, which again, if I, you know, I'm only at my own level of practice with this. I'm not an enlightened person by any means, anything like that, but there is a richness, a feeling, a support, a nourishment I have received in my practice that keeps deepening. And the way it's been taught to me, and it, you know, I'm digesting these ideas just as much as you are, and just trying to sort out for myself, you know, what is this? But that is my experience of it, that we can have this inner nourishment, inner safety, inner security, inner strength that really combats fear and can move us more towards courage and wisdom. So that's why the breath is so important in any of this training, because the breath is considered the link or the bridge between the physical, the mental, and the spiritual aspect of yourself. So if you practice yoga and that yoga practice doesn't involve a lot of breath awareness, and specifically we're trying to work towards effortlessness in our breath, which takes quite a bit of training, but that's what helps awaken this deeper experience. So when you're choosing a yoga class, if you're looking to experience yoga and the spiritual dimension of yoga, I always would direct people to look for a style or a teacher that's going to give you some breath training. Or when you're working with meditation, choose a meditation technique that focuses on the breath. And there are other traditions that focus on this. You know, yoga isn't the only one. All right, let me take a pause. Any thoughts coming up or reflections? So mindfulness and meditation, you know, the way I'm defining this here is we're learning how to focus our attention inward. That's what meditation is all about. I'm actually going to have us try just a short 5-minute body breath awareness meditation, which you're welcome to try. You're also welcome to just sit there. You don't have to. No one's being forced to meditate here. Well, let me ask you this. Some of you raised your hand when you meditated. You know, meditation, which is also so exciting, is meditation has a lot of really good press these days. What I find, what happens is people get excited to learn how to meditate because they're hearing all this amazing, these amazing effects of meditating. Then what happens if you've ever meditated, when you sit down to meditate, I mean, is it instant nirvana? It's really the total opposite of what typically happens. You know, my first time I ever meditated was actually, I was an engineer and a statistician I worked with was a Zen Buddhist teacher. So when he did a 2-hour Buddhist meditation group every week. So I went with him once. And their approach, they just have you sit down and do it. You know, there was nothing. So I feel like my knees are going to explode and my mind is racing the entire time. It was miserable. It was really, really challenging, but I did it. But this odd thing happened. I was at the grocery store afterwards, and at the grocery store afterwards, my mind cleared. I had this moment of, and he had used this analogy. He said, meditation is like giving your mind a shower, or, you know, something to that effect. And so this thing happened to me for an instant. It didn't last very long, but I had this moment afterwards that it's like, oh, maybe, you know, maybe this did something. So I like to really encourage folks, because meditation is incredibly powerful. It really does have amazing long-term effects on stress and connecting within and connecting to this experience of consciousness within. The challenge is you have to learn how to sit with and observe and be with all that goes on in your mind that's in the way of this, that's in the way of consciousness. So the yogis explain, you know, you've probably heard this analogy, you know, the mind is like a monkey and an untrained mind. This happens for everybody. You close your eyes, you sit still. It's likely 1 or 3 things will happen. You'll fall asleep. That's really common when you're first learning to meditate. Or your mind will really start racing intensely. You might have like, you don't even believe how many thoughts you can have, you know, within a minute. It seems impossible that happens. And some people get a little bit more zoned out and spacey. the yogis call these all, they call them the roaming tendencies of the mind, or what's called the modifications of the mind. We get distracted, we get disturbed. They use this word in the yoga tradition, the translation is stupefied, that's when your mind is kind of dull and zoned out. So the idea with meditation is you have an inner focus. What we're going to do now, we're going to focus on body sensations and breath sensations. So when you meditate, you're training yourself, your own inner awareness, to keep bringing your mind's attention, to move it out of distraction and back to your breath. To move your mind out of sleep and back to your breath. Move your mind. So you have to keep doing that again and again and again and again to develop this capacity to become present. So you're not doing anything wrong in your meditation. It's just a part of the meditation process that I feel most people don't get enough instruction when they meditate, and then they give up. And then, to me, that's a real bummer. I'd like you to keep trying, because you'll get through it. You'll get through the notes. All right, let's, what are we doing on time? Okay, I'm just gonna sit here for a moment. So we're gonna do just, this will be even under 5 minutes. But if you scoot back towards the back of your chair, if you can get your feet on the ground or close to the ground, give that a try. And you just let your elbows rest alongside your ribs. You even roll your shoulders a couple times, but we're just trying to sit in a way that feels as comfortable as we can. I know we're not necessarily in the ideal scenario, but you can lean into the chair, scoot back, and just keep bringing your attention back to my voice. Remember what I just said, what we just talked about. It's likely your mind might start to race. Your mind might get sleepy. You might get zoned out. So you can keep your attention coming back. First thing you're going to pay attention to is the back of your body. Just see if you can notice, bring your mental attention to the point of contact between your back and the chair. Feel that sensation. Then bring your awareness to the point of contact between your legs and the chair and feel that sensation. And you can notice the contact between your feet and the floor. Feel that sensation. And as we're paying attention in this way, we might also notice our awareness starts to drift to sounds. There's the sound of my voice. We have the sound of some fans or some air moving in the room. And then we're going to shift our attention now to our breath. The first way you train the mind to connect with the breath is to become aware of the movement of the breath. So if you pay attention to the space of your abdomen and your rib cage, what you'll notice is there's a rise and a fall sensation each time you breathe in and out. If your mind's racing, try to bring your attention back to the feeling of your breath, the rise of the breath, the rise in the belly of the rib cage as you breathe in. And that's followed by a release in that same space as you breathe out. And keep coming back to that again and again. The mind wanders, you're asking the mind, being gentle with your mind, feel this sensation of the breath. And just by working with this kind of practice, even 5 minutes a day, you are training your mind to focus in a new way. You're also building a capacity to be with your thoughts and to be with yourself in a different way. And this type of work, it develops that self-awareness that we need to become more aware of the thoughts and the beliefs that are keeping us stuck. We'll take just a couple more moments. Feel your back against the chair, your thighs against the chair, your feet against the ground. And continue to sense the rise and fall sensation in the belly, in the chest, each time you breathe in and out. All right, now we're going to transition our attention from the inside back to the outside, and you can rub your palms together. This is just a way of bringing attention back outside. You rub the palms to create some warmth. You take your palms over your closed eyes and let the eyes open, and then release the eyes. So I expect we have had a range of experience with that. Like I said, you might have found your mind was racing, but some of you might have found you did get a moment of calm. Or what's also helpful when you're training your mind in this way is to look for very small victories versus looking for these, this huge step towards enlightenment. Even if you feel 10% calmer than you did 5 minutes ago, that is not something to ignore. So we have to recognize we do have a power. We have the power to change how we feel. It just takes practice, and it takes more practice than we think. But if you can get in a habit of, even doing 5 minutes a day, or if you're brand new to this, doing this once a week, it's some kind of regularity that's needed, and you will start to see. All right, the third pillar of yoga practice is, I'm calling it yoga lifestyle, which is really about cultivating more routine and balance. On one hand, this is common sense, but on the other hand, it's really goes totally against the cultural norm. If people know, most people know if they've been around children or animals, children and animals force you to keep them on the circadian rhythm. They force you, they go to bed at a certain time, they wake up at a certain time. With children, it's real obvious if their rhythm gets really thrown off, their mood gets really thrown off. We're just bigger children. Our mind, our state of mind, and that capacity to have a more present and open worldview is definitely impacted by how much balance we have in our routine versus how much imbalance we have in our routine. So yoga lifestyle is really based in the sister wisdom tradition to yoga is called Ayurveda, which is the system of self-healing that comes out of ancient India that shares a lot of wisdom on how to realign your lifestyle with natural laws. So lots you can learn about all of these pillars, but that's just to plant the seed. There's a whole body of knowledge on that. And if you want to learn more, I'm actually doing introduction to that on Sunday at White Swan Yoga. If anyone's looking to do more study in this weekend. Now, most of the time we have left, I'm going to talk more about the yogic worldview, which really is about contemplating the nature of life and really the unique gifts that we all have and how we can serve others, and serve life with those gifts. And skip ahead here. I made a brief mention of this, but what's helpful to understand is these are some themes of yoga philosophy. And the origins, where this all dates back to, is a body of wisdom called the Vedas, which I don't know if any of you have some knowledge of the Vedas or heard that word. It's not exactly known how old the Vedas are. You'll see, I've seen references from 1500 BC, back to 4000 BC. And listening to Pandit Tiganai, also it's not exactly known, exactly when they came into existence. And the Vedas, are the oldest, spiritual teachings on record, in humanity. And, to try to condense it down to a phrase or two, what the Vedas are all about is the nature of reality. This is how the world works outside of us. This is how the world works inside of us. And this is what life is all about. It answers a lot of these questions. And the origins of the teachings are understood to be what are called revealed teachings. And the way it's been passed on in this tradition is that at this point in time, there were enlightened, highly accomplished yogis in meditation in a completely absorbed state of samadhi or enlightenment. And it was in that state of absorption with universal consciousness that the Vedas came forward in their intuitive field. And they were passed on orally for many, many generations, and they predate, and it has the seeds of all the different systems of Indian philosophy that came and have been developed since that time. Yoga is actually considered a system of Indian philosophy, and it's a combination of philosophy and practice with the intention to give you a direct experience of your spiritual self. That is the goal of all these pillars, is that you have this direct experience of your spiritual self. And again, I keep using these terms of more of an inner experience of safety, security, wisdom, insight, intuition, and that's the leader in your life. And you can keep developing and expanding in your meditation practice. So enlightenment doesn't just mean that you're sitting in a cave meditating. Developing yourself spiritually also means you're able to interact with the world in a much more empowered way and feeling more a master of your own life and a master of your own destiny. So the purpose of life, according to yoga, is that spiritual purpose. And the challenge is, and maybe, and you'll see this theme in a lot of different spiritual and religious traditions. Where I think what's such a challenge is that culturally, we are conditioned to find fulfillment and happiness mainly through getting what we want. I don't know if you ever thought about it this way, but I really watch myself, and this is really, for me, the core of it again and again. I want my career to go this way, I want my marriage to go this way, or I want my relationship with my boyfriend and girlfriend to go this way. I want my health to hold steady. I don't want to live in a world that is full of climate change. I don't want to live in a world that has so much violence. But the thing is, sometimes in life you do get what you want. And yoga isn't saying you're not going to want to go after what you want. That's natural. It's human. The problem is that for most of us, it's the only way we know how to feel fulfilled. That our job is going this way, again, our partnership, our children, our feeling of success. And that's actually what the Vedas explained, or what these traditions explain, is this world, this reality we live in, is not designed to hold steady. This world is infused with impermanence. Everything changes. And I have found in my life, you have no idea how long something will last or when something will change. You just don't know. Some things in life we do experience that seem to hold steady for a long period of time, but then there's other things in life where we don't. And it's somewhat of a mystery why we all experience this in different ways. Some people experience impermanence in really extreme ways. Other people, it seems to be less extreme. That's all a mystery. It's hard to answer why. So yoga is asking us to contemplate this again and again and again. I certainly don't want to live in this world where there's so much violence, but yet I live in this world where there's so much violence. And there's really not, as an individual, I can figure out what I can do, through my my own personal action. But beyond that, there's so much that's out of my control. So, yoga is asking us, and this just comes back to what we already spoke to, is that we can experience more of a lasting fulfillment or a lasting mental freedom by connecting to consciousness within, having this experience within, and really asking ourselves to look at our belief system and be open to changing those beliefs. Because if I am absolutely determined, I'm only going to be happy if this thing comes to fruition in my life. Well, I've lived long enough that some of the things I was absolutely sure would come to fruition in my life, they have not come to fruition, and they may never come to fruition. And through my contemplation, that's maybe not necessarily a terrible thing. But it took me a long time to accept that, because I was brought up in this culture where if my life doesn't work out the way I want, it's my fault. If my life doesn't go the way everybody else's life goes, it's my fault, or it's God's fault, or there's so much self-condemnation, at least that I've had. And I think I see some nods, I'm not the only one that struggles with that. Where, according to yoga, the nature of life is not so much that you're guaranteed to get what you want. You probably will get some things you want, and you probably will get some things you don't want. And it's not that we don't want to go after what we want, because that is fulfilling. So it's not saying that it isn't fulfilling. It's saying that if it's the only fulfillment many people will find life is going to fall short. Your ability to really feel fulfilled and to grow inside of yourself will become limited if you're solely focused on gaining that fulfillment from external things. And that the pain and the challenge that we experience, those can be catalysts. You see this in yoga philosophy. I'm going to give you some references. This is spoken to a lot in Buddhist philosophy. And for me, even though I've been around these concepts for decades, I still have to, we underestimate what it takes to really change our worldview, what it takes to really change our belief system so that we can embrace a more expanded worldview that ultimately is meant to lead us to more joy and more freedom. It might depend on how many years you've been on this planet, but I have lived long enough now to know some of the most painful things I've gone through have been times where I'm more open to figuring out how I can fulfill from the inside. I don't know if that makes sense, but when the outside world isn't going your way, you might not realize that you're more open if you're looking, and if you're willing, you're more open to receiving wisdom that can help you feel more fulfilled inside. So that's how the spiritual traditions look at pain and challenge. And I'm not dismissing how much pain and challenge we face. It can be tremendous. And we will experience grief and betrayal and sorrow. And, I always like to mention yoga isn't the only healing system that we need. Therapy, counseling, working with your mental health, with all the healing modalities that are available to us, I believe is important. But the spiritual traditions give you a context to try to frame what are really dark and challenging things that maybe something positive eventually can come out of it. In my own growth, the compassion I develop, it's through my own struggle with my own anxiety and health that inspired me to, I have such a desire to share this with other people, and that's a common story, that through our pain and our challenges, it helps us grow internally, change how we impact our families or impact our society. It's hard to know exactly what will come out of it, but over time you might find something positive about this. All right, I'm gonna let me take another pause or just to check in. Any questions? Yeah.
What did you find first? Did you find meditation first? Or did you find yoga?
I found yoga first. So this was like 23 years ago. And actually meditation wasn't as popular in the mainstream as it is now, which is really cool to see. So yeah, I started, my friend, my engineering friend was taking a yoga class, and, we were all stressed out. So she was like, oh, you should try this yoga class. So that's how I started. I just started with one yoga class. And I know, when you kind of think of all these dimensions, it can be pretty intimidating, when you're new to this world. So it is important just to start with one thing. Like if you're brand new to this whole world, but you're interested in it, you're called to it. I'm going to give you a handout now and just give you some suggestions on how you can get started. But I started with yoga practice, just going to one yoga class a week. Yeah, question?
I guess regarding, you mentioned very early on, like you do yoga, meditation at home. Is there a right or a wrong way to do that if you're just doing it by yourself?
Yeah, I'm going to give you some suggestions. It's very difficult. It's difficult to learn these modalities without a teacher. Now, it doesn't mean you don't necessarily need a spiritual teacher right away. That's not what I'm saying. There's a lot of really well-qualified, well-trained yoga teachers. What I personally now look for, whether it's yoga, or if there's any lineage you're wanting to learn from, whether it's yoga, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, whatever it is what I've learned from having exposure to this tradition is to really try to research how well the teacher I'm studying from has been trained. And if they've been trained, if I can kind of link back who their teacher was, it just helps you. It's a way of kind of vetting that you're getting more of the holism of the tradition passed on to you. So yeah, but studying at home, if you want to do it at home, I'm going to give you some online resources that are good to work with and good to start with. And I also have my contact information on the handout. So if any of you are just wanting to ask a couple questions or kind of figure out where you want to get started, please reach out. I'd be happy to talk to you. Yeah.
How long did it take you to master the meditation, or have you not mastered it?
I definitely haven't mastered it, but it's probably, we have some other meditators here. They can speak to what they're, it's all very individual. Here's what I'll say about meditation. What happened for me, like that experience, my statistician who was the Buddhist meditation teacher. So that experience during the meditation, it was very challenging. But I had this experience at the grocery store afterwards, and that piqued my interest. So even though there is challenge when you're learning how to train your mind, you have to train your mind from going from the monkey mind to going to a concentrated mind. It's going to be a process. It's not going to happen overnight, but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. And I still was feeling something so positive from doing it, even though it was noisy. My history is anxiety, which is a mind that, and I have a fast moving mind, a very mental, constitution. I'm always thinking. So, I can only share for me, but I don't know, I wouldn't say none of this would be something how it would go for everybody, but it was over the course of, I'd say the first 3 to 5 years, the amount of noise gradually was reducing. Yeah, it took some time. But what I would say is if you're drawn to it, just to reemphasize, you do want to look for the small victories. And at least in my experience, I still felt like something really positive was happening. It was changing the quality of my day, even if during the time during the meditation was intense. Yeah. Maybe can we give out the handouts now? Because I know people are needing to head out. And yeah, was there another question? Thanks, guys.
I know there's a bunch of different types of yoga, like power yoga, what type of yoga works best? Or is there a specific type of really this section?
Yeah, it's a what do you want? I would say, especially if you're brand new to yoga, I would rather you do any yoga than no yoga. So it's all going to have a benefit. If you are looking to have that inner connection, you need a practice that's going to teach you how to calm down your nervous system and focus your attention inward. So if you find a power yoga class where they do some breath training, that would work. But sometimes those styles don't focus as much on the breath awareness piece. So I have some friends, they really like power yoga. They might do power yoga one day, and then they'll also go. The term for this style of yoga is classical hatha yoga, Hatha is, you could look for that in a studio. locally, I mean, even at the college, Rosie Latona is here. She teaches classes here at St. A's. And you could, if you want to get a feel for it, her classes will include all these pieces.
Good plug, Sarah.
No problem. Well, originally I thought we had till 5:30, but I think do we have till 5:15?
Yeah.
If anyone needs to go, please go. But I just wanted to take some time. So there's a lot on this handout, and again, if you're new, what I would hope you would take away from today, if you're wanting to engage with this work, is just to choose one thing in terms of how to apply these 4 pillars, and we're going to go through them briefly. So just to throw some Sanskrit words at you, but I mentioned these 4 pillars align with what are called the 8 limbs of yoga, which you will see in the Yoga Sutra, the ancient yogic text. And there's even, there's a lot more you can study to study yogic worldview, but in terms of the 8 limbs, what are called the yamas and the niyamas, which actually translates to restraints and observances, which doesn't really help us too much. But it's in essence guidelines for living. So it's likened to the 10 Commandments, in Christianity, or there's guidelines for right living in Buddhism. How do we behave? How do we act towards ourselves? How do we act towards others in a way that we feel good about ourselves, in a way that we have a stronger and clearer mind? So, you'll see on the handout, we'll get to them in a moment. Here, let me just jump ahead and then I'll jump back. And we're not going to have time to go through all of these today. I'm going to highlight a few of them. But these are the yamas and the niyamas: non-harming, non-stealing, truthfulness. This could be a code of ethics, I would imagine. Moderation. Moderation with, for example, moderation with news and entertainment. You maybe never have thought about it, but if you start to be more aware or intentionally consume less news, I at least know for me, you can have a huge impact on your mental outlook. It's not that we want to be ignorant or put our heads in the sand, but the yogi who founded the Himalayan Institute, his name is Swami Rama. I love this teaching. To protect your mind at all costs was the teaching. We don't think about how to protect the quality of our mind. And that's really what yoga keeps coming back to. So that's just one example. But for me now, I find if I read the news, I get less agitated than if I listen to the news. Because the news outlets are designed also to elicit fear and to, they're be sensational. That's just one example. Non-possessiveness, and then cleanliness, contentment. We're going to talk about self-discipline, self-study, and social standard. And just the remaining limbs, asana is the Sanskrit word for yoga posture. Pranayama, we talked about prana, is about the mastery of prana, mastery of this flow of consciousness. So we start to feel it. We have this experience with it. And that comes from mastery of the breath. So there's many different practices in yoga that train the breath. It begins with what we just did seated, even being able to pay attention to this is how my breath moves. And there's a lot that's built on from there. And then the last 4 limbs of yoga are called the internal limbs. They're all about progressing in meditation to having with the intention to have a deeper and deeper experience of the nourishment, safety, security, fearlessness, and inner strength that we can experience within, which comes from being in a meditative state of consciousness. So if you take a look at the handout, which I think you're already taking a look at the handout, I did just make a mention at the top here that all of these ways of working with yourself are all about creating new habits. And I don't know how much experience you have with creating new habits. Most of us will find we're going to run into resistance, which means we start off strong and then it's just so easy for life to take over and to lose steam. There is no way around this. This happens to everybody. This happens in any area of life where you're trying to grow into some new version of yourself. So, you know, over all these years, I now have found that I need to kind of be aware of how my resistance shows up, and I have to build this muscle to do it anyway. You know, I've been doing this for so long, you know, I still, this part of my mind is convinced, well, I don't really have to do this if I don't feel like it. No, that's my dialogue. I don't feel like it, so I'm not going to do it. Well, that's where self-discipline comes in. If you only do these things that will help you grow and expand when you feel like it, you typically don't get too far. I'm too busy, there's not enough time, I'm being selfish, and I'm not minimizing these. These are big obstacles. But I find it helpful to recognize I'm not the only one, you know, that runs into these obstacles. And, you know, it can challenge me to start thinking about, you know, is taking care of myself really selfish, or is taking care of myself going to help me serve others better? And this is something for me personally I went through for quite some time. You know, this wasn't a switch that went off, you know, in one day. This was an evolution of feeling like it was okay to do these things for myself. That took some time. So then I have some suggestions on how to start with yoga postures. There's classes here, there's classes locally at White Swan. I also met the Himalayan Institute has an online yoga offering, and you know, I would also mention YouTube. I know that might be more accessible to folks, especially if you're first starting with this. There's one teacher online. I don't know if she has much time. I don't know her training, but she's super famous. Yoga with Adrian. I don't know if you know Yoga with Adrian, but I like her classes. She does good cueing on body awareness, and she does some cueing on breath awareness. So if you're brand new to all this, the easiest entry point, which is right on your phone for free, 15 minutes, would probably be Yoga with Adrian. But if you can take the next step, I would come to class here at the college with Rosie, or if you're local, take some classes at White Swan. You'll have more access to more of all these pillars through that avenue. But it's important just to start. That's why I don't want to minimize. The more I've worked with a lot of students privately as well, and it's really just finding that starting point. So I'm thrilled if somebody is starting with Yoga with Adrian, that's great. She has a huge base of decent classes, and so it's really accessible. And I really think it's an amazing service. You know how many people she probably is responsible for, you know, getting started with yoga. Same thing with meditation. There are local classes here again with White Swan. I've also found a real easy entry point for folks, especially apps are so popular these days. I'm hoping someday I'll have a Himalayan Institute app. I can tell you, just jump on, but they don't have it yet. I think they're working on it. But Headspace, that's pretty well known. I looked up, my nephews were listening to Headspace, so I listened to the meditation. I was like, this is really good. I bet this, and I looked up the guy who founded it. He has Buddhist training. He trained as a Buddhist monk. And their method of meditation is similar. There's a lot of similarities between Buddhism and yoga. So that's what I suggest if you're looking for a fast, easy entry point on an app. I recommend Headspace. And they have a couple of free ones on YouTube where you don't have to sign up for the app. So, you know, those are some suggestions on how to start with, you know, just a 15-minute practice. The other thing you can take a look at is under yoga worldview. It's really about starting to schedule some time for contemplating what is life all about and making it a very intentional and active practice. So it could be 15 minutes a day. A lot of people like to do that in the morning or before bed. It could be once a week. You know, I mentioned you might have a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, and sit down with a journal. But it's more setting some intentional time aside for you to think about what life is all about. It could be, I offered some readings from the yoga tradition, and also from the Buddhist tradition, but there might be another tradition that you're really called to. So follow where your heart is called. You know, that's the best, that's always the best course when it comes to trying to figure out your inner life and your inner world. So whether it's any of these or it might be something else, it's more making the time. And if you can make the time and do it regularly, you will start to see some change, you know, even if it's once a week, or going to more lectures, listening to podcasts, just get yourself exposed. And I have absolute confidence that intuitive self will land you where you need to be if you're asking these questions. Don't stop asking the questions. Because that's certainly how I found myself here today. I just kept asking those questions, looking for the answers. So I think we are about out of time. And there's more you can read the details on the handouts. Might be able to take just one or two questions. If anybody has one, we'll wrap up.
Questions? We have a lot of yoga teachers here, practitioners. So if you have anything you want to offer, please do.
Sure, I have a question.
Sure, Val.
Mantras. That's
Yeah, I don't know if everyone is familiar with mantra, but yeah, so the starting point in the yoga tradition for meditation training is breath, but then the yoga tradition is heavily focused on mantra meditation. And mantras are the word mantra actually means a thought that guides and protects. And in the yoga tradition, it's these sacred sounds that have been passed on over the generations in the tradition that when you train your mind to focus on these sounds internally, it helps train your mind to inwardly focus and gain this experience or this connection to consciousness. So yeah, very much it's you'll see it if you read. I gave you two commentaries on the Yoga Sutra, which are written by Pandit Rajmani Tiganai, who's the spiritual head of the institute. If you are feeling that pull to traditional yoga philosophy, that's where I would send you to take a look, and you'll see there's a lot of teaching from.
Good questions. Well, I think we should thank Sarah for a wonderful talk. We are recording this. We recorded it. I should have warned you that.
Oh, no, they told me. That's okay.
And so we'll share that with all the attendees of the recording. So if you wanted to share the recording with anybody who couldn't make it, it'll be available. But sir, thank you for coming, and we'd like to have you back.
I would love it. Thank you. Great to meet you all. Thank you.